feet worth of funding right there. So I just want to,
Decertifying means?
that's what decertifying means. It's not the same as abandoning, and I just want to provide that clarity. When we abandon a right-of-way, typically a line gets split down the middle and the property owners on either side own it. This is city property that was deeded as a park. We don't have that option to hand over the ownership of any of that property, nor is it a platted right-of-way. It's simply an easement through there. We have spoken with the property owners to the north at the Square Deal Country Store. This was a couple months ago, shortly after the applicant came to the Planning Commission to make the request for a less than 3-acre exception to this. And so Square Deal reiterated what we've heard before. They would, Square Deal, they would like to develop their property at some time. They're just on a different time schedule than what this PUD is. That said, as you can see in this drawing right here, they do use the rear of their property now for access, so they just wanted to come in and make sure that this decertification would not take this away from them. And as of now, it's not intended to. That's going to remain open and accessible so that they can continue to do their deliveries in the rear of their building as they have been. So one thing to point out is you'll notice on here, this is a question, Brian, that you had sent me that I didn't get to, order of operations or process. So I spoke with the city attorney today about that because, you know, some of this, in addition to approving the PUD, will take additional approvals from the city commission, such as constructing the trail, which we'll talk about in a second, on the city-owned property, decertifying the portion of the street, as well as building the parking lot there. And what she recommended is all of that just needs to be part of the same recommendation that goes to the city commission, and they would make the decision on the whole development together. So we're good to go to keep moving in that direction. And I'll keep the city commission updated in our weekly updates that we provide to the city manager who compiles them for them. And then hopefully Mitch and Jackie will continue to communicate these plans to their fellow city commissioners. So it is going to include a trail connection down to the existing paved Boardman Lake loop. As of now, it hasn't been engineered and designed. So it shows you the switchbacks on there because there is a pretty steep grade drop at this point. So you would need those switchbacks in order to make it ADA compliant to keep the slope down. That will necessitate some tree removal naturally. But we do have in our mobility action plan a connection to Boardman Lake called for at Carver. So here we have a private developer paying for and constructing a trail that is in the city's plans for the benefit of the city population. So that is a public benefit that would be realized through this. The material of the trail has not been determined yet. At the end of the day, the design of the trail has to be signed off and approved by the city engineer, who will have to balance environmental protections, safety, as well as accessibility, because this would be a city-owned trail on a city property, so therefore the engineer has to stamp it with her license. It will be noted that in the renderings they show a dock or a pavilion down by the water. That's very conceptual at this time. Anything of that nature would probably need additional city commission approval on its own and may even warrant Eagle or Army Corps as the water of the state. Now, we do anticipate bringing this project to the Parks and Rec Commission because this is a piece of parkland property that they have purview over to get their input, just like we did with the trail along the waterfront previously. So we'll work with Michelle Hunt of the Parks Department to get that scheduled, to give them feedback. Pavilion design. So the buildings themselves, I was looking at the design. They somewhat appear to pay homage to the site's industrial identity. That's how I would interpret it. I mean, it is called the Mill District. It is utilizing a lot of dark earth tones and materials in the design. I know for some people that's a little harsh, contrasting looking. When I was thinking about it, because I live on the other side of the lake, I actually think it's a really nice design element in that from anywhere along the lake, those materials are going to blend into the landscape much better than, say, 4 or 5 white buildings sitting on top of the ridge. That's going to really stick out anywhere along the lakeside. So all the uses that have been proposed are allowed by right. Remember, a PUD does allow deviation from the established standards. They need to be memorialized. At this point, the only deviations that are proposed are the setbacks, because again, it was a very constrained site, which is why they're doing the PUD to begin with. Bless you.
Thank you.
And the C2 district, which this is zoned, has a maximum building footprint of 6,000 square feet. So the anchor commercial building at 9,000 square feet would be another exception to the base zoning. But I do appreciate how the developer has broken the development into 4 separate buildings. I think that helps with the view sheds through there, gives a little more porosity, better connectivity within the development to the surroundings as well. So with that, I don't think I have anything more to add at this juncture, but I do see that the development team is here. So if you would like to provide an overview or answer any questions, you're more than welcome to. I'm just going off the application material, so you guys might have a lot more backstory to fill in. You're choosing.
Hello, Tim Pulliam. Is this like a city commission meeting? 516 West 11th, Traverse City. I am one of the mill shop guys. We do own the business, the TC Mill Works. We also are looking at developing this parcel. I have with us our civil engineer for Mission Engineering, and I have Andy Weir, who owns Brick Wheels. So, you know, site and civil engineering and business mix in the anchor building would be Andy. I'm here really because we have the wood shop property. We'd outgrown our space there, so we looked to move to a parcel we had over in Arrow Park. As we started building that property, Andy actually reached out and said, well, what do you think you're going to do with the wood shop? Because it'd be cool to have the bike shop there. And so that conversation, over time, months of talking about what would be the cool mix for the site, led us to this. So like Sean mentioned, 3 of the buildings are kind of by right in their size and scale, and we really would like to keep it that way. I live just across the lake too on 11th Street. At least at this point, we worked with the architect just to pick, like he mentioned, natural materials. We went with stone and wood and things like that. We don't want this to be like obtrusive to the Boardman Lake Loop. We travel around there quite a bit. When we started talking about developing this, especially since, you know, the anchor of the development is going to be kind of an outdoor themed business, something that's been in town for a long time. With the Boardman Lake Loop, we instantly called our friends at TART, and I started working with Chris Cushman over there because I knew we've talked about it actually for a long time. I've talked to Commissioner Warner about it for a long time to provide access to those neighborhoods down Carver with a Boardman Lake connection even before we own this property, because we actually own this property because a friend of ours owned the wood shop before we own it. And so we'd been talking about that connection for a long time. So we have designed in at least what we feel like could be a cool barrier-free connection for the neighborhoods and pedestrians to get to the Boardman Lake Loop. And the anchor will be a mixed use. It will be a bike shop. It will end up containing some sort of food service business, and probably, hopefully, that will develop the way Andy came to us. We'll have a friend or someone else local that wants to do something there. But there isn't a lot going on around the Lake Loop, even with all of the traffic it gets. And I'm on the loop quite a bit, and as I come through Hall Park, I always see cars spilled out over onto the lawns, parked in between the parking lot and I just think, like, we get so much traffic on this loop, there's not really a place to stop when you're done. There's no place for people to access it that aren't fortunate enough to, like, just ride their bike there from down the street like I'm able to. And so I feel like we're able to accomplish a few different things with this. And I can take any sort of questions, and I can bring the team up if there's any questions you have specific to them.
Thank you. Who has questions? Ryan.
How many housing units are being proposed?
I think we're looking at 1,500 to 2,000 square foot units and 3 buildings and 3 stories. So I would guess, you know, we're looking at 16 to 18 probably. I don't know. We don't have the housing, the actual floor plans of the housing designed yet. We really wanted to start. I mean, we know we're going to have 3 buildings for residential. And in all honesty, I mean, it would be possible that since we don't have them designed yet, if another person we knew came and said we would like a first floor retail space, I mean, that could probably happen, but we really want to get the concept going and start on the anchor building, because our goal really is to try to have that occupiable by summer of 2026. So it would be a phased. We'd start with the large building, the just under 10,000 square feet, and the underground parking structure, and then we'd fill it in, and then we'd move to the residential in the next 12 to 18 months.
Is there going to be, is the underground parking structure in the main, for the main building, is that going to serve the additional 3 residential buildings?
It is, and that's part of the reason why we need the PUD. You know, you almost could, the site is a little bit tricky, and we definitely wanted to address things like access to the Boardman Lake Loop and things like that while we were at it, because this is kind of a good spot to do it. But one of the issues is we'd like to have, we're doing all on-site stormwater management, and so having the parking served for the entire development underneath is beneficial, but trying to have 3 different or 4 different underground parking ramps starts to just chew up a ton of space and lead to a ton of additional hard surface. So technically, even though it looks like 4 buildings, they'll be connected by an underground, technically, like this would be one giant building because it's gonna share a common foundation. Even though there'll be green space and soil and trees and things on top of it, underneath the ground, it's one giant building under the whole site so that we can have parking for the whole development underneath.
You have, what, 64 spaces underneath? Is that about right?
We haven't even drawn them in
Yeah,
yet.
okay, so.
But,
more
I mean,
than-
we've at least sketched them out to know that we have enough spaces to provide a space for each residential unit, spaces for Andy and his stuff. And,
Well, with 64 spaces and 20 units, I mean, that's at least, you know, can easily provide 2 spaces per unit.
yeah, we could, and there'll be
Yeah,
some
I'm not saying
spaces
everyone's
for.
gonna need it. The reason I ask the questions is I'm wondering about how much spillover would be into the surface lot from the development. There's always gonna be spillover. You can't get away from it. You know, so I don't know. So there's gonna be spillover, visitors, if you got a big sale going on or something like that. But there's also parking in Carver, so I'm not worried about it. Did you consider running the access, or have you considered running it using more of Carver Street and pushing the, you know, the access and development a little bit closer, or a little bit farther south, and not have to take out so many trees for your switchback? That's one of my questions.
Oh, for the trail connection?
Yeah.
The trail connection, really, we could talk about quite a bit as far as exactly how that gets dialed in. We drew in, based on actual topography, the amount of space it would take to make that trail connection, you know, and for people to be able to access it, and also assuming just because there's a lot of bicycle traffic and more e-bike traffic lately, like, I wouldn't say that connection, the way it's drawn, is probably going to end up being ideal. A lot of, and I actually talked to Heather Smith today before we came here. Whatever we do there, we're going to want to make sure, and I don't know if the rendering shows it if you flip to another page, but we're definitely going to want like some buffers and some pocket parks in between the switchbacks too, to deal with some of the stormwater issues, because it is a pretty steep fall, and they always kind of planned on making a connection somewhere there. But if you want it to be barrier-free, we are going to have to take up quite a bit of space. So that's all on city property. So whatever we do would have to, it's going to end up being city parkland. But we're going to need to make sure that we capture the ability to deal with both stormwater, but also a barrier-free access, and keep as much of the tree canopy as possible, or replace it with new things that will help with stormwater management of that additional hard surface. We also did talk, because parking is an issue, and we will have spillover, and it didn't end up on this site plan, which is why I'm glad we're having this chance to talk about it now. We could have additional parking on the east side of the buildings, like one row that runs in, so that people who live there, if they ran out to go shopping, they could pull up along the east side. We do have room in between the buildings and the railroad easement where we could have a drive in there. We want to have as little hard surface and paved stuff on the lake side looking toward the trail as we can. If we had to have additional parking or access drive on the east side of the property, we could do that through the process as we're designing.
I have one more question, and maybe for staff. When they decertify that easement, the city would still own the easement, so the parking would belong to the city, or would the parking belong to the property owner?
It
Or
would
does the
be,
city have the option to also abandon the easement?
well, the easement sits on a city parcel, so even if we abandon the easement, we would still be in the same situation because we own the land underneath the easement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, and it's really funky. So if you can see my cursor right here, this is the property line. And we'll have this called out on future renderings, but it comes down here all the way to this corner. So it is a really weird property line.
We actually own Sheffer in one spot, like all the way across to the other side of the stop sign, and then
Yeah,
it
like over
dips
here.
way into toward our building, and even our railroad easement for some reason, sometime in the '60s when, or late '50s when Sheffer Collett was there, they had some unique deal with the railroad at that time, and then eventually that all got transferred to like the Traverse City Industrial Fund or something, and so on the northeast side, we have kind of a funky shape too. So was a few kind of weird things going on. We envisioned that that parking that you see on the west side would be public city-owned parking, and we'd either work with whatever parking entity we would be working with at that point. And maybe it would be some sort of arrangement like what Common Ground did, or I'm not sure. I know that there's models out there that we can explore. But I don't know if it would be metered, if they'd want to mess with that or not, or if it would just be public parking.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then to Tim Pulliam's point, the engineering department about a year and a half, 2 years ago did start to design a connection around Carver, and it is very challenging. I mean, no matter what they did to get that grade at the appropriate slope, it was taking a huge swath. I mean, they tried going south of Carver, north of Carver. So I think the reality is the connection here will create a disturbance. I think it can be mitigated. I think it can be done thoughtfully, but it is a challenging ridge because it drops real steep real fast, and it is wooded. So I think moving forward, Eric, it might be worth us setting up a meeting with the engineer to kind of discuss some of those to get some direction there as well.
And I know Chris at Tart Cushman, he had thought about that in the past too, when talking with engineers and things. And that's kind of how this design got fleshed out on this plan was, he actually is the one who brought it up. He's like, well, have you ever seen like Lombard Street in San Francisco? And other than pictures, I haven't, but I Googled it and I looked and I thought that would be a sweet way to make the connection. It would blend in pretty nice with the site and the surroundings. It would kind of pay homage to the natural feel of the Boardman Lake Loop. I mean, I like the fact that the Boardman Lake Loop isn't 100% developed, but I do feel like it's missing some spots where you can stop and take a break and go get a coffee and a croissant or rent a bike or something like that. I mean, that would be pretty cool. And I also feel like this development, because we know there's going to be more development toward the north, this sets the tone for that. And that is something that we tried to accomplish, and it's something that I expressed to the design team, and it's something luckily that Andy, who we're working with to do this project, everybody was kind of behind. And even Tart, when I talked with them, like, this isn't just going to be, we're not just kicking a little stone path down to the lake and putting up a building. Like, we want to set the tone for development that's going to move to the north, and we want it to be something that's awesome, and hopefully at least most of the community can get behind and feel like it's additive. And so that's what this design was, kind of the intent behind it.
So I was reading through this. It says the south building will be the largest, be 2 or 3 stories. Are you envisioning? What are you envisioning for that building?
We have it drawn as 3 right now.
Okay.
And if you look at the elevations, which I believe you have the whole pack there, right? If you can look at the elevation from the east side, we actually step each floor back so they get progressively smaller. We just kind of did that because we don't want these to feel like giant boxes.
Yeah.
And at this point, I mean, we know there's going to be one large retail business there, and then some sort of restaurant, brewery, tap room, maybe cafe, bakery. But it's big enough that there could be 2 or 3 smaller businesses and one larger anchor in the building. Yeah, I think that will probably get worked out as we work through it.
So my question is, how can you be incentivized to go 4 stories on all 4 or on all of them? on all the buildings? Like,
I mean, we're definitely, I mean, I'm not anti-density by
Yeah,
any means.
yeah.
At all. I mean, and I live right in the neighborhood, and people ask me all the time, like, well, you don't care if somebody builds a fourplex next to you? And I say, absolutely not, because, like, maybe somebody like my wife and I would move in, like, when we were young and living behind the funeral home on 6th Street, and like, no, I don't have a problem with it. And we wouldn't have a problem with going 4 stories here necessarily, especially on the residential buildings. I mean, it's a little bit easier to model and forecast for that. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think we would have an issue with half of this property doing that, though, because we're in an air. Bob at the airport would be mad if we went 4 stories on
So
half
this,
of the south building.
yeah, this building right here is going to be limited because it is in the approach path to the airport.
Okay.
But just the south end where the main retail anchor is
It
going to
is.
be, moving north, buildings 2 through 4 would be outside of that, but there will be restrictions, and there may even be limitations on this building as to the type of uses that can be there, like heavy assembly, the airport. There's some density for
some
the
density on that.
residential, and like, anything that's gonna pack a lot of people in there, say, you know, and an engine falls off a plane, they wanna minimize
It's
the
about
risk.
half of the big building
Okay.
that's in that zone.
Yeah.
And we can go 45 feet there, and we technically, by right, I think can go 45 feet in the other buildings, and maybe we would need to go a little taller to go 4 stories, I guess. You know, that would just be a question for the architects and engineers, like how tall would we have to go to do that? We are going to have underground parking under all of it, but I think we were able to do that and maintain the elevations that we have at Carver, right? So it's not like we had to build the buildings up to fit the underground parking in? Right. So definitely something that we can at least put a pencil to while we're doing this.
yeah, and then I didn't see any mention of like affordable units. Are you not planning? And it's fine if you're not. I'm just curious.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because when we first got this site, of course, a lot of people came to us to say, well, what are you going to do with it? And we really didn't have any idea because, well, we got it because we liked the wood shop and the guys that worked there. And so that's how we ended up with the site. But I have a tough time because I know how big of a need there is for affordable housing. And when we run numbers, and we're not developers, so I don't run numbers the way like the people building like the places on Garfield or the towers on, you know, the people that understand how to work with things like LIHTC and MISTA, and we've dabbled a little in trying to learn that, but definitely there's an economy of scale and a number of units that make things make more sense and easier. We see it pretty hard right now with pricing today to build stuff for much less than about $300 a square foot. So, you know, I just try to tell people, like, I know we want to do residential here. I don't want it to be short-term rental. We want to sell these condos, and we want people to live there that are part of the community. Hopefully people that are kind of into the types of things that we are into, like they like access to the Boardman Lake Loop. They like riding out for dinner or a coffee. We want this to be a community.
Yeah.
And the businesses to be part of that, and we want it to be, we want it to bring value. And how, you know, do they need to be $600 a square foot like what we're seeing things getting built and selling for? I mean, I don't think that they do, but unfortunately they probably won't serve people that are in the 40 to 80% income range in our community because you can't build things that cheap right now, unfortunately.
And then this is probably a question for staff, but I mean, has the need for the surface lot been identified? Surface lots are a really hard sell for me, and it's near a hill, near the watershed, like the runoff, like can we require it be permeable or something? Like, I guess, like, sell me on the surface lot.
Yeah, so surface lots per se, we haven't been keyed into as much as trailhead access is something we have been talking, and knowing that that does come with the surface lot, because we look at the one at 10th Street, which is a little constrained, and we've had those conversations internally and through the mobility action plan that we do not have a lot of trailheads. I live off of 16th Street, and again, it's just kind of like that's how you access the trail, but there's nothing ceremonious about accessing the trail there. It's just kind of So it's something that we have been looking at, and again, we have that connection there. Whether it's permeable or not, we still have a stormwater ordinance that would require the water to be captured on site and infiltrated as such. So I think that's just those things that we have to work out still. And again, this is where the city engineer will come in because it'll be on city
Okay.
property at that point. So
Yep.
that's why I'd like to continue those conversations with
And if
her.
it helps for that lot to like, because we're gonna have stormwater infrastructure to deal with all of our stormwater on site, so if that part of the surface lot, even though it's on city property, I mean, I imagine that there's a way. And I'm totally okay with permeable surface for that lot if that ends up being what we should do. We have the same concerns with stormwater. I mean, it's probably as a business owner in town, I mean, it's one of our number one concerns because we know the impact that stormwater has, not just on the lake that's right there, but just stormwater as an issue on other things like our wastewater treatment plant, our aging sanitary infrastructure and things like that. We want to keep the stormwater where it belongs, so.
I would not do my last name justice if I did not bring up the fact that there would probably be maintenance on that lot.
Yep, and that's why I did, in my memo, call out DPS weighing in on this, because they're the ones that maintain the trails. So I think when it comes to the design, since they'll be the ones snow plowing it and stuff, we'll have them at the table as well and talk about the maintenance. And, if this is going to truly serve as a public parking, then it might fall more on the city to maintain it. If it's being utilized more for the businesses, it may fall on the development to maintain it. So those are the conversations that'll come through the process of who will be like, really it's snow plowing is the main one. Occasional resurfacing.
The only thing that I had was between each building, it looks like there's the 2 5-foot sidewalks and then a space.
Yeah.
Is that what you were talking about? Might be like a pull through? I'm just trying to visualize
I
it.
don't think we'll have any vehicle pull through, but on the east side of the property,
Yeah, I'm sorry, for the residentials.
I mean, I can walk over here if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Like, we could have a pull through pretty easily. Up parking, it could be a small drive.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will pull in underneath and running in between dropping kids off at school. Just with all the extra traffic we've been seeing on the board, one of the things we love about being at the wood shop is that cut down the little trail that's there now. And we just see tons of people walk down here. Again, I see the cars in the front. While we're doing all this, it makes
Yeah, so the reason I asked was because it looks like there's 5-foot measurements between each residential building. And I was trying to get, I had to zoom in a lot on my image to see it. So I was just trying to conceptualize, well, it looks like it'll actually be like 15 feet between each building.
Yeah, about 15 feet.
Okay, so then it would be, in my mind, more accessible then if it's a larger distance and it's not just confined to the 5 on each side. It would actually be 15 realistically, so people could travel between. I was just trying to envision multiple people.
Hopefully we don't have ever any cars traveling between, because we want to keep all this green space.
Right, but it would be like sidewalk use, like
Absolutely, yeah.
people are gonna put their strollers, so then you could fit like, this is an exaggeration, but like 7 people wide walking through the buildings. That's why I was trying to
Put a
figure
lot
out.
of traffic going back and forth through
Yeah.
the building, and really, and I don't know exactly how this is going to look. My mind. I hope that this creates a place because as you're going around the far south end down here, there aren't many places other than Hall Park to stop right now, and I'm really hoping that whatever we can create here does feel like Pocket Park. I don't know exactly what sort of area, but it would even be cool someday. I hope it gets utilized for all sorts of things.
Yeah, I like this. It's better than what is currently there. It moves us leaps and bounds ahead of what is currently there, so I do really like the project. And I want us to start thinking about every little inch with intentionality. Like that, those between the residential buildings, I was envisioning like a cute little walkthrough, like with the fountains between Kilwins and the bread pizza
Right.
place. So like that kind of, yeah, okay, great. I missed that picture apparently in the back.
So that is kind of what we're going for, and that's why I said, I mean, I feel like those will be all three complete residential buildings.
Yeah.
But it could make sense, like, if another friend like Andy called and said, man, we would really like to put a shop in the first floor of one of these. I mean, I think we probably could, and it would even add to the mix. I mean, I don't think it would make it worse for anybody if one of those ended up.
Yeah.
Because now you're walking through, you have people living upstairs, you have a doorway there that goes. It doesn't really require us to change, I don't think, our PUD application or anything like that. I think, but since we're doing it in phases, like at least having the flexibility to say, well, the first floor in the next 12 months while we're designing and building the first building, the first floor of one of the residential could end up being retail. That isn't necessarily a goal of ours right now, but I mean, it's definitely nice to keep kind of the opportunity open, because if somebody we know and we like
Yeah.
to be part of this thing calls us, then we would try to integrate that.
Yeah. So then, sorry, going back to my first point, this is mostly a question for the planning director, I think. When we did the sidewalk setbacks, this doesn't apply because it's like between buildings, or would it? Like, remember when this was pre-you, this was like, and we extended them, I think Brian was here, to like
Yeah,
18
so
feet?
on certain corridors.
Was it on the big corridors? That's
It was
why,
like
okay.
Garfield, Grandview Parkway
Okay.
and stuff
Major
where.
street setback ordinance of 2019.
Yeah, that's the one,
yep.
Mitch.
Yep, so that's in there. So that wouldn't be applicable
Okay,
to
great.
this. Yeah, and going back to the idea of the parking possibly on the front, just that would be another exception from the Planning Commission, which is totally grantable in the PUD, but I just want you to be aware of that. Because we have a requirement that parking can't be in front of buildings. It needs
Yeah.
to be on the side or behind. Well, this property has 3 front yards, so it's kind of limited,
Yeah.
which again is why we're doing the PUD. And just like when we deal with things like the Haggerty Center and the Senior Center, we also don't want parking on the water side. So, that's where we have these balance and trade-off discussions.
We definitely probably will draw parking in on the east side for now, because I mean, I would much rather have it drawn and presented as worst case, which would be more, because I don't love solid surface and parking all over either, but again, I live on 11th Street and can ride my bike here. So we'll draw that in and submit that. you know.
Yeah, I think that'd
For
be worth
discussion,
putting in
I
there. And I
think.
think to Brian's earlier point, that might help differentiate trailhead parking and business parking. If that, if I was visiting the place, I'm probably going to pull in the front and, because it's
Right.
closest if I'm visiting via car.
You
whereas-
see it at Oriana. I mean, there's like
Yeah.
4 signs. I'm there almost every
Yeah,
morning.
yeah.
And, it says Oriana or trailhead parking, and then it says Oriana parking only. And I mean, I can admit that when I do drive over there, sometimes I park in the wrong parking and access Oriana when I shouldn't, or access the trail when I, like,
Yep,
I
we
do.
all kind of do that. So
But it seems to work okay.
but it does seem to work for the
it
most
does,
part.
yeah. But I mean, it is a good point. You see that it's
You do.
used quite a bit there at 10th. I mean,
The thing I
we
see
had
the
to put
most
up
are,
delineators on 16th because people were just parking all over, because we don't have that, but there's a desire to. Because ever since, I mean, you notice it with your property where you're located, but ever since they finished the loop, it didn't like double the usage, like quadrupled the
Oh, it's
usage.
so
Now
awesome.
that you can do a circuit and
I
a lot
can't
of people
believe
are
how much
coming.
busier it is. I
Yeah,
mean, it's,
it really is incredible. And it's a destination in and of itself. But to your point, it is lacking destinations along it. As someone who uses it quite a bit,
there'll be
they're
30
really-
cars parked on the grass at Hall Park.
Oh yeah.
And not even in the summer. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty wild. You know, I'll go there and be like, wow, there's that many people on the loop today.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else want to talk about what you like about the plan or what concerns you? Mitch?
Well, I've got a number of questions, many of them having been previously alluded to, but like I understand that it is easiest to say that we simply don't want the easement right now, but would abandoning it more formally require additional paperwork or a vote of the people?
To relinquish an easement, I don't think that would.
Okay.
No, the vote of the people comes when you're changing the use or disposing of the parkland.
Well, that comes to my next point, which is currently the property line kind of cuts across what is shown as a parking lot on this property. While I appreciate the need for more parking along a heavily used trail, especially one that sees more amenities, and if we're putting more housing and development near to it, I am not that much in favor of changing what is currently, at least on paper, public parkland into public parkland that is natural area and natural vegetation into a paved parking lot that then has to be maintained. So it makes me wonder what the square footage requirements are for parking for this building. I mean, obviously, we don't require a certain number of square footage aside from what's underneath, but what the developer sees a need for and the extent to which that can be contained into a smaller area, and if the parking lot is going to be, say, maintained by the developer, would that require, at least for a portion of it, giving up parkland?
We did try to keep all of the parking on Sheffer Street. So, because we didn't want to remove any more trees than we needed to. So if you look at like the part of the plan that's up right now, the parking would basically just be on what the street is
Yes,
currently.
but parking lots are more difficult to plow and maintain than a street is right now.
Maybe. I
yeah.
don't plow, so I can't
Yeah.
speak to that.
Right now, I'm
Yeah,
not.
the dirt road.
I'm not sure who really plows it much right,
Yeah,
right now.
there's probably not a lot of
Every once in a
plowing.
while, somebody goes by and puts down some
brine.
calcium chloride
Yeah.
because they do dust control. I notice, and
Yeah.
I'm not. It usually looks like it's one of the fracking trucks from Kalkaska. Maybe just got permission to spray it there every so often when they
Right.
have too much solution pumped out of a brine
That
well or
is an
something.
approved use of that brine.
It is. I
Yep.
know. I see them come by and spray
Yeah,
it
yeah.
every once in a while.
Yeah, in terms of the maintenance, I think closing Sheffer to travel and not maintaining that portion of the dirt road, which is a lot of maintenance to maintain a dirt road, would actually be less maintenance in the long run.
It should give us more room actually, you know, where the parking lot ends and the tar trail is, in between the trail, the pathway, and the buildings and the water. We should be able to fit additional vegetation and green space and trees back in there. Because, you know, we don't want this to really look just like a barren hillside or something.
Yeah, and I understand that, and it explains some of the difference between renderings. The specific configuration of the ramp pathway is still in flux and subject to final engineering, but that is roughly the linear feet that it will have to be to accommodate the grade issues.
It is, yeah. It could travel further to the north, and we have a really nice picture, Sean. I don't know if you could pull it up, of what the path looks like from the lake.
Yeah.
That is
What it
based
could
on
look like.
actual, right, what it could look like. That's based on actual topography, so that is the actual height difference.
Now, the one thing I do want to point out on this, because this is where renderings can cause a lot of consternation, is that the intent isn't to clear cut all the trees
is
around
not.
it.
But
It's
you
just-
wouldn't
that's
be
just-
able
there's
to see the-
limitations in rendering, so I just want people to be aware of
Yeah,
that.
you wouldn't be able to see the elevation of the buildings
Yeah.
if we
Right,
would have
trees
left
are
all the
there.
trees in, but I mean, there's a ton of locust and invasive species along that hillside, but any tree of any size or value, we're absolutely going to want to keep. And already, anytime we take a tree down off of any city lot, we're milling it and kiln drying it and turning it back into something that goes in the community anyway. So we'll be sure to limit the amount of trees as much as we can. And then there is a tree ordinance. So I mean, obviously, like as we have to remove things, you know, we'll pay into the fund or we'll replace them. We definitely not tree haters for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would
Good to
say that even though would be the same amount of linear feet, regardless of configuration, I'd prefer fewer switchbacks just because if you are going to have bikers, they're not going to be going 20 miles an hour, but it is easier to navigate turns and easier to see people coming in the opposite direction if you're spending more time in a straight line or can see further down
Right.
than around a sharp turn.
I would just add, though, that since this will be city-owned, we're obligated to meet ADA compliance. So that's, I think, a max 2% slope.
Yes.
So it's going to cause a run that's going to be larger than maybe we would like to see, but that's just the law. So, and
Yeah,
it's
and
the right
having
thing to do.
a little bit of room for some vegetative buffers in between the hard space on the way down the slope, I feel like is important so that we have a spot to stop water as it's coming. And plus, it will just be pretty for people to look at when they're walking up there.
Can I add one other thing, too, going back to the pavilion and the site plan, because we didn't talk much about that, or we'll just call it the pavilion and the dock. But if you'll notice on the site plan, there is a more direct connection as well coming off the parking lot area. And so that was intended, like, if you have a kayak or you're not in a wheeled device, that you can walk more directly down to the waterfront. You know, at Hull Park on the south end, we have a place to put in for kayaks. We have one at the north end at Medali Park. We have one off of 12th Street on the west side. We have no access on the east side. So this would actually kind of balance that equitable access around the lake. So again, much more to go on it as far as getting through all the approvals, but I think it's a great idea and a great amenity to have down there.
And another point, you had said that the maximum allowed without going through the PUD process would be 6,000 feet per building. What is the current square footage of the TC Millworks building that's on the site now?
Just under 13,000.
Okay. And I notice, yes, you said that the property lines are unusual in this area on both sides. The TC Millworks building goes closer to the railroad tracks than your buildings are shown, aside from the ability to provide additional parking or traffic lane. Is there a reason that you couldn't move the buildings a little closer to Woodmere?
We may have had additional traffic lane when we first started talking about this. I'm not sure why the building ended up positioned exactly there.
Yeah.
We do have room between the east side. I know you
Yeah,
probably call it the front of the building because there's road frontage on that side.
I don't
call
know
it the
what
back.
your specific building constraints are, but you can have parking closer to an active rail line than you can have a
Exactly.
building.
We absolutely could, so it's kind of nice to have it cheated toward the front because of that.
Now that you see more than 30 trains a year, but it's
Yeah.
still an active rail line.
It's an active rail line. Yeah, I called them to see if they could run a train from our mill site here to Kingsley, for us, and they absolutely, the rail folks are great. They're very accommodating. They wish that they had more reasons to haul more things up here than the 2 cars twice a week that they do.
Anyone else have, yes, Shay?
I wasn't here when we approved the PUD, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but is this, I love your enthusiasm and I think you're committed to this project, but let's say, is this transferable to a buyer?
Yeah, so a PUD is like a SLUP. So once it's in place, the property can only be developed as prescribed in the PUD with
Okay.
all the conditions and things memorialized in the order granting. Now, there are processes to amend the PUD. to change it, but it does kind of lock you in. So
Okay.
part of the PUD requirement is a site plan. So we will eventually get the detailed of like where the stormwater is going to go and all that kind of stuff, because that's a requirement that we have. So more of those details will be fleshed out.
Okay.
But yeah, yep, it stays with the land.
Okay.
Yep. Now, there is a way to possibly rescind a PUD, like you can rescind a SLUP, but that's a whole nother process for
Yeah.
down the road.
Okay.
And one thing I would encourage the planning commission, as they think about the PUD and memorializing the exceptions and things like that, is it may be helpful to them to bake in some flexibility. Market conditions change. No one really benefits from vacant buildings sitting around, and
Right.
so I think that's part of the conversation as we move forward, how you can control the development but still allow some market flexibility in it.
I know a little flexibility would be great for us because we're not actually developers. And we do things like, as opportunities come up with people we know in the community, which is how this came up. So, I mean, this footprint and this scale works. It penciled out in our spreadsheet with our CFO and our bankers. They didn't think we were too crazy. We have Andy who's running his numbers to be sure that it works for him, and it seems like it does. So, you know, I don't think that there's any dramatic changes that we would ever consider, because I feel like this feels pretty cool. We would make changes as necessary to keep the community happy. And maybe we would have a mix of retail and residential in the other buildings perhaps, but other than that, I don't really see us wanting to do anything different.
The important thing is that we're at the beginning stages of this, and there's a long way to go. The design team will be involved, engineers will be involved, and it'll be fleshed out over time. I appreciate all the effort that you put into this in a difficult site. Love the connection to the trail, and the river, love the kayak thing we just heard about. And I really appreciate your emphasis on stormwater management. So I hope as you go forward, you'll really be thinking carefully about that, the type of plants you're using, and rain gardens and all that kind of stuff that works.
We will. Our friends actually, Nate Ed in Habitat is like a friend of ours. We just put solar on his shop last week. I mean, as soon as he heard about this, I feel like we got the right community partners, and we have the right enthusiasm and passion, like in our city management. Like, I feel like we can do something that's, I don't know, like it's got to be pretty cool. We're busy, so it's like I don't have a ton of time to just stick buildings up. It's like if we're gonna do something, like let's really do it.
Can you speak, Tim? I didn't mention it at all, but I was reading in the article today. I think you spoke with Beth. So you intend to be fully electrified. Any other? Can you speak to any like green
Yeah, I mean,
elements that you plan to
I
incorporate?
feel like it's funny because when we started Keene 17 years ago now, I used to walk into these boardrooms and I'd be talking to like the C-level people, trying to talk them into doing things that were good for the environment. And I had to just start putting at the end of a spreadsheet like that it was black, not red. They only cared about like the numbers. And so I almost couldn't even talk about the positive environmental impact for the first, until maybe 5 years ago. It was like, I was so excited to talk these people into doing something that was right, but I had to only convince them with the numbers that were measured in US dollar. And so it feels a little bit weird, and it even felt weird like putting in the application like, well, we're gonna be fully electric and we're gonna integrate renewable energy. Because that's what everybody says now. But we do it. Our new wood shop in Arrow Park, it's an industrial building in an industrial park, and we didn't even run natural gas to it. And I remember when DTE reached out and they're like, hey, you got to get your gas survey in, and what are you? And we're like, oh, well, we're not even running gas to the building. And I think they thought that was crazy, but we do this stuff for people every day, and we absolutely are going to do it here. We do walk the walk. And it's not greenwashing with us. We will be fully electric, and not just because of the positive environmental impact, but it actually makes sense. It's lower cost to operate. It's easier to maintain. Like, the technology is there now. When we started the business, it was a little more bleeding edge, and we definitely took some lumps along the way. But I feel like, we want this site to align well with the city's master plan, which I feel like it does. We want to meet the other goals that the community has with things like full electrification and as low of a carbon footprint on this facility as we can. We do find things like stormwater management, very important. I mean, I want people coming here because of access to the things that I love about this place. And if we destroy it, then we'll get people coming here for other reasons. And I feel like we got enough of that already.
Thank you. Any other, Ryan?
So just a couple comments. Mostly what we're seeing here, we're not seeing any details. We're looking at really a size and scope question. And I think the size and scope currently, at what you're presenting is fine. You start getting in the trailhead, gazebo, the walk trail down. You put 20 units there plus everything else. People will make paths down there. So, I think it's going to be, and something's going to happen with Square Deal eventually. That's why we rezoned that property. It used to be, I think it was all industrial.
It was
We-
R3, or well, it was
Was it?
multifamily when I first started, which we used to have density limits. So by zoning to commercial, they were actually able to get more dwelling units per acre.
Yeah, so-
Ironically, we've fixed that. So.
I mean, and when they came to us and we rezoned your property too, I mean, the whole purpose of it was mixed use, and R2 is better for that. So, yeah, I think the scope and the density is fine. Final positioning of the buildings, that's up to you. The parking area, the trailhead, that's mostly on city property. Whether or not the easement, the city can leave the easement. An easement is just basically granting public rights, public, trespass, basically, over the easement area, whether the city owns it or someone else does. So the city doesn't need to abandon the easement. They're just going to decertify that as a road. If the city wants to leave it gravel or whatever, that's a question for the city commission and Parks and Rec. It's not, I don't see it as integral to this PUD. It's nice, but I don't see it as, it doesn't matter to me. I just, when it comes back, in a little more detailed drawing, I want to know if that parking's not there and the city says no, then are you gonna, I don't want to approve a PUD and then have it, and then find out we're putting parking somewhere else and it doesn't come back to us. So I'd want to know where the parking is, any surface parking is going to be in advance. And I think what you proposed earlier is a great solution, is put it there, maybe we build it, maybe we don't, depends on what the city says. For that, you have two options. Yeah, I mean, what time, and I guess my other question is, when do you think this will be actually, how quick is this going to move?
Well, we would start it, we started design and engineering. I think Andy is excited to be there in 2026.
What's
Well, I
happening on
thought,
8th
actually,
Street?
I'm looking more about our timeline.
Our time.
Oh,
Yeah.
So like,
Well,
when
so
do you
your
expect to
timeline would
bring-
be-
When do you expect to bring it back to us?
I would
mean,
imagine
do
probably
that
after the
quick.
new year now, just given the reality
yeah.
of the holidays. I mean, we'll meet with Eric and Tim and give them some direction, hopefully before the holidays, which frankly, this is the only item on the agenda. And with the heater broken, we almost canceled this meeting, but we wanted to give them the
Thank
feedback
you,
so they
by
could
the
keep
way.
moving and not wait till after the new year. So, yeah, I think we'll meet before Christmas, and then once you guys get the drawings hammered out, we'll bring it back for initial feedback. Ideally, what I would like to do is bring it back to have you guys look at it, give your feedback on the more detailed drawings. If they need to make some changes, let them make some changes, bring it back to set the public hearing. You'll hold the public hearing and make your recommendation. So that right there is probably 2 months of public hearing notices and scheduling meetings and stuff like that. So really comes down to us giving them the information, them doing the work on their end, and then us starting the review on our end. So like I said at the onset, it's an iterative process. PUDs are unique in that they are more of a negotiated development compared to some of the other land development options that you look at. So that's why, again, we wanted your input now, because you're the ones that are ultimately going to be making the recommendation.
And we wanted to make sure we weren't in left field with this whole concept. I mean, it looks great to us, but, you know, this now is when the heavy lifting starts on our end too, so we really appreciate the time to have this process beforehand.
I think it's a great start. I think it's I forget your words, trend-setting project. There's a lot great about it. It's a first start. I like how you guys step the buildings back as you go up from the water. I like how you reduce the massing of the building from Woodmere Street by, you know, creating 4 buildings with some pass-through. I think it's a great first step. I love how you're integrating, you know, the mobility component to it on your own dime. I think it's a great step, and I'm excited to see what you guys bring back to us.
Beth, do you have anything to say?
I like it too. I like the greenery as long as it stays maintained. I've been to places where then it doesn't and it looks like crap. So it looks great in these pictures. I like the front of the buildings with the balconies. Does every unit have a balcony?
Yeah, the way it's drawn right now, every
Okay.
unit has a balcony. I would think that that would be a goal that we would try to maintain. I mean, it's just such a beautiful setting.
Yeah. And then if there are businesses, I guess I would just want to make sure that these are soundproof because there have been some buildings around that I've heard a lot of problems because of sound.
Yeah, I've heard about that. The county code office, the nice thing is now, like, since those few issues, they ask for sound transmissivity data on your surfaces between walls and floors of different use groups now. And I know that because we just had them ask us for like the sound transmissivity of the flooring that we were using. And we actually ended up doing an underlayment in between because it wasn't high enough. I mean, but the plan review process captures that now. And in the past it didn't. So unfortunately, like people didn't know, like I didn't know honestly what the sound transmissivity of different flooring between mixed uses were until like 6 months ago. But it definitely will want to be considering that if we end up doing retail. But we probably wouldn't even make that decision for like until we get Andy's project going for a while to decide if there was going to be retail in any of those other buildings. I think in a way it would be kind of cool if there was, but it would only be cool if, I mean, it was cool retail.
Just thought of something. You said you don't like short-term rentals, you want these year-round.
I don't dislike short-term rentals necessarily.
Okay,
I mean,
well,
it's
you-
cool to
but-
get people up here to our town, but we're not going to do short-term here.
Okay, but they're gonna be condos. So once all the condos are sold, the association will determine it based on zoning, which would be currently, which would be 1 per 4. 25% could be short-term rentals. My question is sort of, I guess, first to you. Do we have the ability to request that he deed restrict the property to no short-term rentals?
Yeah, and honestly, since the PUD approval travels with the land, he wouldn't even have to do a deed restriction. If it's just in the order granting that they're prohibited, that would be a deviation from the base zoning that would have to be adhered to. Yep.
So, okay,
Yep.
something that I think that's,
I don't think we're going to see, luckily, many investors buying condos in our community for short-term anymore.
unique spots are still hot.
Yeah, this is a
You
pretty
know,
sweet spot. This is a pretty
When
sweet
you
spot.
build buildings where they're all short terms, not so much.
Right.
But when you get like one, you get a couple.
Yeah,
They're-
and I
they're-
always am kind of torn with that because, like, if somebody owns one of these and they live here most of the time, but they remote in California or something, I mean, I don't know, like, do you let them rent it while they're gone? Do you do owner occupied? I mean, I
Short
don't
term
know.
is anything
but
less than 30 days.
yeah, and I don't,
So
I
they can rent
I
it for
definitely don't
30
want a
days.
development filled with, short.
That's, that's up to you. I don't know what the feedback's going to be from this commission or the city right now. And as part of the PUD, it can always be amended going forward.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you. It can be somebody,
It could be somebody else.
the-
We didn't plug it into our numbers, but right, I don't know, like, as we sell these units, I don't know what those people will do. And that's assuming that we end up being the house, I mean, we're gonna be building all of this, but I don't know that we'll actually be like the housing person, like, where there might be somebody who who knows how to do condos that comes in and says, well, we'll sell and market the condo. So I'm not against saying like on the residential buildings, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess
and-
that's what we'll talk about through the
Yeah,
process.
and that happens as long as the, whoever is the new owner, they just have to follow the PUD. I mean, when you look at Morgan Farms, it's 3 different owners, and so like, it was approved as one development, but a multifamily developer bought phase 3, which is the multifamily part, and they're building that out, and different developers built out different parts of it, just, it was more
Right.
their shtick.
I mean, we definitely plan on building them all out and selling them at first, but then there will be a condo association. I mean, just because legally, like, I've had to learn about, because we're not developers. I
Yeah,
had to,
and
like,
you'll be
call
out
my
of it.
lawyer and be like, are we gonna need a condo association? And in this case, we need like 4, because the underground parking has to be its own, because it can't, because it's all one big yeah, it's, that's what
Yeah.
else I have to figure
Well,
out.
and even within one building, like 101 North Park, where the pie company is, I think that's 4 different
Yeah.
condos in there.
I think that
The
they told us we
residential,
should
the
have 4
parking, the
here.
pie company, and then the school are all individual condos. Not condo units, but.
Associations.
Yeah, associations, yeah. With that, yeah, and speaking of the short-term rentals, I know you guys talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but I met with a property manager of short-term rentals, and to Brian's point, these multifamily buildings that are all short-term rentals, they're just becoming a race to the bottom, because everyone's trying to charge lower than their neighbor to get you to book with them, and it's just kind of not working out.
One other thing that, because I like the design of this building so much, is there a thought about event space? Like,
Yeah, there
Yeah.
definitely is. I mean, in
that
the-
top level, I think, would be pretty awesome.
in this big mixed use, I mean, in a lot of this, it's gonna really all end up being up to Andy on the big building. But, I mean, we're a team and we talk about these things because we want it to be cool. You know, we picture this being a spot to launch your adventures from. We really wanna commingle the different uses and spaces to a common theme. It doesn't mean they'll be the same owner or the same operator, but they definitely kind of have to have the same vibe, and I think that that's going to be important for like the longevity of the people that are in there. Yeah, we've got some stuff to figure out because you know he doesn't need a 26,000 square foot bike shop, you know, and since the ticker article, obviously like people with breweries and restaurants have already been reaching out. Like, oh, well, do you need somebody to be the brewer or whatever? And, you know, we're not really to that point of the conversation yet. Like, we need to get through this process. We need to start building the building for Andy before he has to leave the spot on 8th Street. And over the next 6 to 12 months, you know, we'll figure out the mix for the main building, and then we'll move into the residential. We do not plan on, and I don't even know, we do not plan on selling off we want to build out the residential units as well. My company at Keene and TC Millworks, we own both those companies, like, we're going to be building those out, and we may be building them out with Andy on the team, and, you know, I don't know exactly what the residential will look like, except that, you know, that's the footprint, unless we go 4 stories on them for some reason.
I could just see like parking in general being a problem. Like, what if the brewery is like this hot spot and it gets written up and like, you know, like everything we do does. And then it becomes a destination, not just for bikers, for everyone. And then people are just like pulling in and out and people can't, you know,
Then
like,
they can take the train.
Wouldn't that
I
be
feel
sweet?
like this happens here. Like,
It does.
places become hot spots and they're not really meant to even be what they become, or they become something different because people make them different.
I never thought I'd have a hard time finding parking at Farm Club, but like I
Right,
did all
okay, so
summer.
that's a perfect, kind of a perfect example. Like,
Yeah.
you're in there, then you can't really turn around, and it's hard. So like, in this space,
We definitely have room on the east side to do, I mean, there's quite a bit of room. We could fit quite a bit of parking over there. I guess, like maybe, and I don't know how the PUD process works exactly, but like I would rather build less and then have it overflow and then have the ability to build more on that side if we needed to.
Yeah,
as long as there's
my opinion is just to be way more conservative, because I don't like surface lots. Who cares? It'll up your popularity if people can't get in. There will be spillover into that underground parking.
Oh, absolutely.
People will have access to Carver. They can get towed if they park weirdly on Carver. Like, I would love to have it be a space where we're not trying to micromanage parking, because we're trying to focus on the building and the beauty of that connecting space. So I'd say just agreed.
which
We're
I
a
like
one-car
that.
household too, so like it's possible that there will be fewer cars.
And I think, like, know Tim, he likes to ride his bike, and I think his vision is that a lot of the people that do live there probably won't have a car. They'll be riding their
I
bikes
think so.
year-round.
Yeah.
So that opens up underground parking, surface parking for the restaurant, whatever is there. So, like, I think the lack of parking is it's a fallacy. Like, I think that's not something we should get caught up on right now, so.
Yeah, and to your point, Tim, I think what you would want to do in the PUD is illustrate these, but then maybe speak to a phasing plan, what you plan to build first. And so maybe
Yeah.
this additional parking is something at the end if it's needed. You
Right.
know, we can figure that out. I think by putting some parking on the east side, you're going to offset that. 64 spaces underneath, and granted, it's not, that's what it could accommodate right now. That's quite a bit,
Right.
you know, if people are willing to do that. The residents, I'm sure, the workers, sure, but, you know, the people just stopping in, and we'll have to see how that works. You know, with signage and stuff, we can obviously direct that and get them there. So yeah, I mean, because I live by Thurlby Field, so I see the chaos, and you know what? People figure it out, and people
Yeah,
drive
they
slower
do.
through the neighborhoods
They
when
do.
people
Yeah.
are parked on the side of the road. They still make it to the stadium.
Well, and like, if what you're putting together, and I'll use this whole development as an example, but like, you need places that aren't all that cool to be really easy to get to. But if you make something rad enough, like, you don't have to worry about how people are gonna get there,
They'll
And-
find it.
you know? So,
I mean, again, farm clubs like out in the middle of nowhere, but
that's a great
Well, and
example.
their
of
goal is for people to bike there too.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that
it's
is what
super
they-
far away
Yeah.
comparatively.
well, and I know from where I live on 16th Street, it would be way quicker to bike than to try to drive and sit through all the lights and Woodmere and 8th and stuff.
Absolutely,
It's
way
just,
quicker.
yeah.
Yeah, especially if Boardman Lake freezes and you can bike straight across.
I never feel comfortable on ice.
I'll
not my
groom a
thing.
path.
Yeah. We can do some cross-country ski demos with brick wheels out there on the ice. I was
I'm
thinking
sure
about that.
there'll be something rad
like that?
happen sometimes along this site, yeah.
Well, do you have one
Just
more?
last questions, you just think about leaving Schaefer there as a road and allow people simply to park on it the way they could now. In other words, basically just either, you can make it one-way with angle parking. It's an existing road, so, but again, I think that's, you know, we can, normally when you have a public sort of park development, it comes to us after the Parks and Rec and the city and staff have kind of said, this is what we're thinking about doing, is it consistent with the master plan? So, you know, and so that's really, it's gonna be, you know, you're gonna have to meet with Parks and Rec, and they're gonna have their opinion, and then it's gonna go to the city commission, they're gonna have their opinion, and it's gonna come to us, and whether or not it is, I mean, really, any park improvement will have to come to us, whether or not it's consistent with the master plan as a separate item, correct?
It would be part of the consideration.
I think
Yep.
the master plan shows Sheffer Street being closed. At least in those renderings that are the pretty
Yeah.
renderings in
Yeah,
the master
yeah.
plan show a
Yep.
park there.
Yep.
And, I mean, it was kind of our inspiration in a way. We were like, oh God, that would be so pretty, let's just get rid of the road. But I see what you're saying, like, if you made the road cool, I mean, we tried to make the road cool by Workshop, and like, it's not
Garland.
super cool yet, but when it was first happening, I was like, wow, that could be really cool.
It needed trees.
But it
There's- I mean-
doesn't feel as cool as I was hopeful it would be when it happened. And so I definitely wouldn't want something like that to to happen, like,
Yeah, and there may,
being like trees and plants sound better to me. You know, we're able to take like literally 2/3 of Sheffer that's adjacent to our property and turn it into park. I mean, I love that, but I mean, of course I would. Our buildings are gonna be there, but I mean, I love it even if those weren't my buildings and I was just riding my bike by there. I mean, I would rather see that.
City could just leave it a gravel road,
We could just,
maybe gravel instead
every
of
time we
dirt.
ride by, we can just sprinkle some native species seeds out in there and eventually it'll just fill in.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there's ways that, you know, access, to your point, Brian, could be maintained if that was the desire, you know? Where it gets tricky is then if vehicles are coming through here, now they're cutting through where the non-motorized is gonna be, but, you know, this is where we're gonna have those design discussions to try to figure out where that works the best.
Put it underground.
Entire building bay could accommodate quite a bit of parking and access. We have room for access and parking. Volume was parking lots of maintenance. Part of the PUD, and then as we work through process, like, at least we'll know what we can fit, and then if we need to take some of it out, we can.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yep. And
Right.
then we will have, and we'll discuss this in our meeting, but we have some, you know, parking screening requirements with vegetation, so we'll need to accommodate for that in the
So
space.
we would want to hide it. It is
Especially if it's in
ugly.
the front of the building, yeah.
Parking is ugly.
So.
Well, thank you, Tim and team. Does anybody else have any more comments? We're good. We're not making any decisions tonight. This is the beginning of the PUD process, but I will open it up for public comment. If anybody has a comment to make, please come to the microphone, state your name and address.
Bill Manny, 905 Bay Street, Traverse City, Michigan. Love you guys' idea. Gets a thumbs up for me. I'm just going to say what most people are always afraid to say. Affordable housing is 25, 30, 40 miles away. People need to build equity, buy a house, build equity. Where have you ever seen an affordable waterfront community? Secondly, I'm pretty familiar with this area, and you're in the TC Millworks. What are the proposals for Carver Street? There are over 100 cars a day going up and down that road to the Lear Corporation there, along with probably 10 semis a day going up and down that little tiny road. What are the expected improvements for that road to manage the industrial traffic along with all your pedestrian traffic that we may be looking forward to increase on that road with that business? So Carver Street needs to be addressed, how to manage the industrial traffic with the activities of the traffic that will be patronizing the businesses and the potential housing right there on that spot. Right now, Carver Street is really, I drive by that place for 40 years. I work at Lear Corporation there, so I've worked there when that was just a dirt road, and then it's paved, and it isn't wide enough for left-hand turn lanes or anything right there right now. It actually probably needs to be a 3-lane road. Right turn, left turn, 4-lane road maybe. So something needs to be done with that if this project is going to be successful, I think, or appreciate as much as it could be. But I do love the project. I think it's awesome.
Thank you. Anyone else have a public comment? Nope. Please come to the microphone.
You gotta go up to the podium.
This is about this project. We'll have another public comment. She was asking what public comment this is for.
For this project.
Yeah, and then there'll be another public
one,
comment.
just a general, we're doing
Yeah.
the second one, okay. Does anyone else have a public comment about this project? Please state your name and address.
Paul McCarthy, 401 Washington Street. I love it. I say 4 stories, more density. I'm wondering about if the underground parking, is that supposed to accommodate the customers of these businesses also? Or is it just the tenants?
Okay, thank you. So any other public comment on this project? Okay, now we'll open up for general public comment.
Comment.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Question for Director Winter. We require a traffic study if it's more than 500 trip ends per day, which this project is not expected, right?
No, we don't have any trigger requirements for a traffic study. That has come about as a requirement in the past of the city commission or the planning commission. The last one I worked with was the phase 3 of Morgan Farms required a traffic study, and they had to put in a right turn, deceleration lane and a left turn lane per MDOT and stuff. So
Or that's off a state highway?
Yep. The trip ends is just whether or not a by use or by right use comes to the planning commission for approval or gets approved by staff. So that's where trip ends comes in. So it's 500 is a threshold. This, it's hard to say if it would even trigger that, but it has to come to you because it's a PUD. So.
Okay, now I'll open it up for general public comment.
And on a different note, my name's Sherry Huggett. I live at 122 North Elmwood, and I did write the forum piece entitled "What Are the Planning Commission Values?" that was in the Record Eagle a couple weeks ago. I do not purport to know your jobs, but I do know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of some of your work here. We've been residents of Slabtown neighborhood for over 20 years. Happen to live across from the Blue Boxes, or Twin Towers as you refer to them. Built in 2017, empty for nearly a year now. I'm also a member of S-Town Action and helped circulate the petition you received regarding preserving Bay Street. As you know, we only spoke with less than half of the neighborhood, the overwhelming majority of whom were in favor of preserving Bay Street. And we could have gone on. We just thought that 330 signatures on a petition was enough to merit a direct response from you. After all, how many layers of government do we need to speak to our city government? We all understand that the master plan does not actually change the legal designation of the property along Bay Street, but it does open the floodgates for investors and developers to start submitting proposals for these properties now. And no doubt that will be helped along by the new National Zoning Atlas that will show where regulations can be changed to encourage more development. Yes, these proposals for projects must each then be processed by you and the City Commission, and residents will have a couple opportunities to protest this train of events. And I say train because how much momentum, or in other words, how much investment of time and money will be behind the project at this point. I also say train because we can expect that we'll have to repeat this process for every car on the train or for each property along Bay Street in which the investor of it wishes to submit a proposal or so. So while your words about this process may be pacifying to some, your reactions to our neighborhood survey and our petition speak loudly. So you may understand why we ankle biters do not have a lot of faith in our ability to have any substantial influence over this process. And yes, the master plan's over only a 5-year plan. God forbid we plan ahead for 7 generations or even 1, but look at what's happened to our town within just the past 5 years. So again, I ask you, what motivated you to upzone Bay Street within those last few months before you finalized the master plan? And lastly, what are your values? It doesn't seem to be to local taxpayers nor preserving the character of this city, other than this plan is. But just what do you hope to gain by selling out Bay Street? Because we feel in Slabtown that we have a lot to lose.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a public comment to make?
I don't know what the zoning is of this, the TC Millworks property. What is that zoning currently right now? Could somebody?
Can you state your name
Oh,
and
Bill-
address? For
Bill Manny, 905
Oh,
Bay
sorry,
Street,
sorry.
Traverse City. I don't know what the current zoning is of your property right now. Is it C1, 2, 3?
He needs a direct.
Talking with us.
Yeah, anybody that can answer that question for me, just so that's C2 right now. So there's talk about zoning Bay Street, C1, C2. So we just talked about a 3-story, potentially what these gentlemen are looking to build, which it is in the perfect location. It is zoned the way it needs to be. There's not a lot going on there. Bay Street is the last beautiful waterfront neighborhood in Traverse City. And if by changing it to that commercial zoning, C1, C2, we're talking about a 3-story unit, 4-story unit, mixed-use development. Somebody's talking short-term rentals potentially. It's just the neighborhood residents, we circulate a petition. You know, people don't want your, not ours. We don't want your zoning changes to Bay Street. We want it to stay the neighborhood that it is and stay the beautiful atmosphere it is with the right mix of activities that are there right now. That's all I really got to say. It's just disappointing when we come and speak with the city commission and one of the commissioners read a article out of the zoning rules that I'm sure somebody steered her to, and that was a perfect opportunity to where the city commission just washed their hands of being able to help the neighborhoods and the tax-paying residents out with political agendas like the zoning commission is proposing with our zoning map. So you people just need to listen to the tax-paying residents and not the developers and the out-of-town money. That's all I really got to say.
You. So I do want to let the commission know, and anybody here who is listening, that representatives of the Planning Commission did have a very productive meeting with the Slabtown Association president and 4 other people that they brought, and we have engaged in discussions with them. We are waiting for them to send us some things. So I just wanted you to know that occurred in the last few weeks. Any other comments or questions? Nope. Okay, so with that, I will adjourn the meeting. I hope everybody has an enjoyable holiday season. Commissioners, please come forward. I have gifts.